Societal thinking actually is a very simple idea. If we all understand design thinking, which is human-centered design, systems thinking, which is understanding systems and all the different components, and societal thinking is how do you design for the society. So in that sense, that's the basic question that is in the quest. That's the quest of this idea, saying, okay, so if we have to design for all the different entities in a society, which is government, civil society, private sector, communities, people coming together, what is that design? So that is societal thinking in a nutshell.
So my question for you is where, you always talk about solving at population scale. And therefore, how do you measure success when you aim this big? When you talk about impacting 1.4 billion people or, large scales of people, how do you then define success for something this big?
I think this question of measuring success starts with a deeper introspection on what is this quest for success. Let me start from the other end. When do you think we would have succeeded in education? When do you think we would have succeeded in healthcare? When do you think we would have succeeded in climate action or justice or gender equity? I probably have to be humble enough to admit that I don't have the wherewithal to succeed. But I have the ability to measure progress. I can understand, am I making things better? Because success is when every child on this planet is adequately educated, and that is success. So I think that's why I kind of stay away from measuring my success, but I would rather measure my progress. This question kind of reminds me of Avengers, the movie, right? You need Captain America, you need a Hulk, you need you need all the characters in there. You need Loki as well. So the question is, when you're trying to solve a very complex problem, which is very wicked, intractable, then you need the superpowers of different actors to come together. At the highest level, it's the superpowers of what the government brings, which is scale, what the social innovators or the social entrepreneurs, the NGOs bring, which is deep understanding and empathic understanding of this community. What does private sector bring? They bring innovation, and so on and so forth. And now in this process of transformation, all these different actors manifest their leadership in different ways. What really needs to be at scale is what's context free. What really needs to be, one thing at scale must be context free. Few things at scale should be context aware. Many things small is where the real change happens, right? So look at it like a big bang. Right, it was like this, right? So you have something which is very common to everyone, roads, right? And that should scale, right? Beautiful. But it doesn't mean that every car has to be an ambassador. If you recollect the ambassador from the history of India, it doesn't mean that every car has to be an ambassador. So, and Schumacher wrote this beautiful book, which was Small is Beautiful, right? So I think small is very important, but just the small and isolated small, an out of network disconnected small, while however beautiful it is in its context, is injustice to its smallness. It should be a part of a larger network. It should be connected. It should be easier. It should be something that people can learn from, something that people can replicate in other places. People use the word replication. I said, if you just add a hyphen, call it reapplication, that would be much better.
Welcome to another episode of Three Techies Banter. Our today's guest is someone who insists that he's a beginner, which is charmingly modest for a person who spent years trying to rewire entire societies and how one can solve problems for societies. We have with us Sanjay Purohit from Societal Thinking, and we know he's one of those few people who can make scale, systems, and societal change feel like something that's almost logical. Today, we're going to decode his thinking, challenge a few of the assumptions, and we're also going to nudge him into admitting that he knows a lot more than he lets on. Sanjay, welcome to our podcast, and welcome to Three Techies Banter. It's an absolute pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Sheetal. It's such a pleasure to be here.
And Sanjay, just to kickstart this off, because our listeners may not know about what you do, just for to get a sense of what is societal thinking in a nutshell and what inspired you to transition from corporate problem solving to tackling societal challenge.
Societal thinking actually is a very simple idea. If we all understand design thinking, which is human-centered design, systems thinking, which is understanding systems and all the different components, and societal thinking is how do you design for the society. So in that sense, that's the basic question that is in the quest. That's the quest of this idea, saying, okay, so if we have to design for all the different entities in a society, which is government, civil society, private sector, communities, people coming together, what is that design? So that is societal thinking in a nutshell. What made me move in this direction? Well, I think after having worked in the corporate life for more than 25 years, I was ready to graduate. Like they say that you should never retire, you should only graduate. So I was ready to graduate. So I graduated, like I graduated from college to corporate life. I graduated from corporate life to a societal life to say it's time to take on something more complex, more unpredictable, more challenging. And so 2016, I started this journey with a simple question that if everybody is having a hard time scaling what works, then what is the real question? What does work at scale? So that's how this journey started.
So my question for you is where, you always talk about solving at population scale. And therefore, how do you measure success when you aim this big? When you talk about impacting 1.4 billion people or, large scales of people, how do you then define success for something this big?
I think this question of measuring success starts with a deeper introspection on what is this quest for success. Let me start from the other end. When do you think we would have succeeded in education? When do you think we would have succeeded in healthcare? When do you think we would have succeeded in climate action or justice or gender equity? So I think the question more is, are we trying to measure the success of what I do? Or am I trying to measure the success as seen by the people in the society? And hence, I probably have to be humble enough to admit that I don't have the wherewithal to succeed. Uh, but I have the ability to measure progress. I can understand, am I making things better? Because success is when every child on this planet
Educated.
is adequately educated, that is success. So I think I that's why I kind of stay away from measuring my success, but I would rather measure my progress. So now, how do you measure progress? Yeah, that's a great question, right? In the sense, are things getting easier, more accessible? Are things getting more effective? The measuring progress then takes that responsibility to a different place. So I think that's a more appropriate question to answer.
Okay.
In that sense.
So I guess therefore, when you talk about progress, obviously it means that am I doing better today than I did yesterday? But when you then put that in the context of a country like India, and where have been fortunate to talk to some of your friends and colleagues like Pramod and Sujit and others. And, I mean, he humorously had said that, 100 million people is a pilot in India. We have 600,000 villages. If you kind of reach 100 villages, 500, 1,000, 10,000, you still don't make it. So while the objective is great, how do you, get to that at a societal level, taking one piece of technology and maybe pushing the government and, while I'm not meaning to oversimplify, but a UPI and a digital identity is still at one level of difficulty. But when you're trying societal change, and like you talked about education, justice, women's equality, safety, whatever, how do you even kind of envisage anything? How do you even begin that process and design a system-wide change at a systemic level, for want of a better word?
No, I think that's a great question, and I think it always starts with a question. So my personal journey has been understanding that what is the right question to design for, because many a times, um, if we place that question as a subscale question, then the answer cannot be a scale
True.
answer. For example, if we're working on microfinance, then the question is, what does it take to extend affordable microfinance to 100 million first time formal borrowers? That's the question. I'm not saying it's an easy question, but it's a question. Or if you're trying to work for advisories for farmers, and how do you ensure that there is accountable, reliable advice being extended to 200 million farmers? And so on and so forth. There's so many large societal questions, right? It all, like even when Aadhaar started the question of saying, how do I enable 1 billion residents of India to actually be able to prove their identity digitally, anytime, anywhere, and so on. So, right, even UPI is a basic question. So I think it's always, first thing is, what's that question that we want to solve at scale? Even when you would have spoken to my colleague Shankar, or you would have interacted with him in the past, saying, okay, how do you really improve access to
True.
education for 200 million children? It's always the question. The question is what defines the scale of the problem, right? So when people say I'm scaling, I would always have this conversation: are you scaling or are you growing? Uh, because scaling needs a scale. So what's your scale if you're scaling, right? So are you saying 100 million, and now where are you? And are you scaling? Or are you at 20 and now you want to go to 30? You've done 30 hospitals, you want to go to 50 hospitals. You're growing. That's great. It's amazing. But is that scaling? And hence, what we have learned over the last many years now is that if you say we have to make a transformation happen for 100 million people, then it's a journey of mindset shifts. For example, if a pilot is typically 2.5% of that population, so if you are aiming to make something work for 100 million people, then 22.5 million is a pilot. And it's not about it's large pilot, small pilot. It's about, till you hit 2.5 million, you have to retain a piloting mindset. You have no idea what you're trying to do. You're trying it. At 10%, you probably have something relevant. At 30% adoption, now you think, oh, you have something significant. Hey, this is good. This is interesting. At 60%, this is the standard because you cross the tipping points, and and 80% you are done, because the last 20% is the hardest part, right? So that is going to take a very long time, and slowly more and more innovation has to. So I'm saying, getting to this kind of scale, whether it's in education or, and to your other question about saying, so how do you imagine this in, say, healthcare, say remote access, early childhood development, or we talk about livelihoods or income generation for the ultra poor people, right, who are absolutely completely out of the society, nothing. What does that mean? I think that requires a lot of unbundling. That requires a lot of deconstruction of the problem. While the question is a big question, currently one of the questions that I'm working on is, what does it take to get 4.5 million children effective early childhood education? Right? Now, that's a big question. But then you try to break it down, and you try to understand who are the different actors, what are their abilities, and try to break it down into smaller and smaller pieces and arrange them. See, how I'm trying to answer this question is, everybody thinks that they know everything about that problem and everything about that solution, but that's not true. Actually, no one knows everything about any problem or all solutions to any problem. So you're trying to understand what is the most context free part of this, right? For example, if I was in a school in teaching, then if I have to teach geometry, the shape of a triangle is context free, right? It will not change if I was teaching it in Tamil Nadu or Odisha or Meghalaya or Tuticorin, it doesn't matter. But if I was taking this to an area which is very tribal and rural, then some things will start to change because the shapes that they associate with a triangle are not the same. You can't say that a triangle is something that looks like a nacho because they've never seen a nacho, right? And then if you're going to teach that in their language, it's very context intensive, right? Because now you have to figure out how to teach that triangle, which looks like something local, which is a triangle, and you have to teach it in the language. To your point, what do you do that small thing which is at scale is that what is a triangle? That thing doesn't change. For example, if you look at a UPI, the ability to interface between systems and exchange information about a monetary value is very context free. It doesn't know why you are using that money, what are you using it for, why do you want to transfer it now. It doesn't care. So the more we understand the fundamental context free, like the GPS, it's very context free. It tells you are here. It doesn't know why you are here, how long will you be here, will you be here tomorrow. It doesn't care. Those kind of things have to scale the entire system because they make things easier for people who are working in context aware and context intensive areas to do something. Now that I have GPS, I can locate a car, right? That kind of a question, right? Whereas everybody tries to, like, I want to be a ride hailing service provider, but I want to start by launching satellites. That's not going to happen. Somebody has to set those basic. So that's what we mean by saying, even if it's healthcare, say remote healthcare, it's the same problem. There are a few things, protocols of healthcare, or the ability to access an expert who understands that disease or who can deal with multiple diseases, related complications at the same time. Many of these things are context free, but we try everything is very context intensive and hence they don't scale. So there's a project we work with called Project Echo, which works on diffusing healthcare expertise across the country in India. And the question is, a healthcare didactic or a protocol is context free. But when you bring it to a community who has a certain genetic construct and certain food patterns and nutrition, starts gaining context. And then you bring it to a patient who is multiple drug resistant TB and has started developing cancer and is a diabetic patient, that's context intensive, right? But every solution does not need to be context intensive. The ability to understand every disease is context free. That should be done at scale. So that's, I hope I was able to kind of explain.
No,
Saying,
absolutely.
yeah.
So supposing so my wife has worked in some of these proposals, that those co-impact funded projects, and I think Breakthrough, FES, and some of that.
Mhm.
So one of the things that these NGOs or these non people who are going to be the vehicles for delivering this change, they find it, number one, very difficult to shift their thinking because they are usually very localized. They work at a state, few states, or agree, and then they find it very difficult to then translate this context free thinking or operation at scale to their kind of so while while you may have identified those context free layers, number one, what are the experiences with translating this problem to the NGOs, and how do they deal with it? Because I guess they and then the governments are ultimately the vehicles of delivering this service, however much you may simplify it, because in their head context is everything, right? Because so how does that thing work? And I'm sure there's no perfect answer, but I mean, what has been your experience with kind of relaying and conveying that?
Yeah, this question kind of reminds me of Avengers, the movie, right? You need Captain America, you need a Hulk, you need you need all the characters in there. You need Loki as well. So the question is, when you're trying to solve a very complex problem, which is very wicked, intractable, then you need the superpowers of different actors to come together. At the highest level, it's the superpowers of what the government brings, which is scale, what the social innovators or the social entrepreneurs, the NGOs bring, which is deep understanding and empathic understanding of this community. What does private sector bring? They bring innovation, and so on and so forth. And now in this process of transformation, all these different actors manifest their leadership in different ways. And I think that is an important factor to consider. For example, somebody like me, and maybe sometimes you've also done this, you would volunteer for something. Now, that's an expression of leadership, right? Saying, fine, it's my city ward. I want to do something. I want to put in my time, take up the cause, meet the MLA, get something sorted, and so forth, right? That's one level of leadership. Then there are some who will show up as saying, I'm very entrepreneurial. So I'm going to start up an NGO. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to drive new thinking. I'm going to drive new innovation. And that's good. And so some of the actors will bring that superpower because they will bring the entrepreneurial ability to organize resources, make the change happen. You know how enterprises work. Increasingly, we find more and more people coming in as system leaders. So they will say, we'll understand where the locks and blocks are, right? Saying which feedback loops are stuck, which actors are performing. But we are seeing that increasingly there is a fourth kind of leadership that is being manifest. And that leadership we are calling as system orchestrators. These are the people who essentially know how to orchestrate this complex set of actors and know the how to time it, how to ensure that people bring their strengths forward. Not everybody can build that common operational backbone. Who can? But then that is not enough. Somebody has to then hit the community and get the stuff and the adoption done. And that's where the NGO is so powerful. And then the government has to come in with its resources and policies and regulations to kind of give it shape, and private sector has to bring in sustainability. So I think this premise that any one actor can be that superpower is something that is probably the reason why this becomes so daunting or challenging at the onset. But the only way it actually gets done is that there are these different Avengers who unite. But you need somebody who actually makes them come together and keeps them together, because it's very hard. It's very hard to come together and stay together. On one side, because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, it's cost, it's complexity. On the other side, we are all people, right? So we have to ensure that manage the incentives and reasons and connections. And so those actors, that fourth kind of leadership, I am seeing manifest more and more and more, not only in India, in multiple countries, because people have realized that it's been 40, 50 years, sometimes even 100 years, that we are struggling with these problems. And wherever people have been able to come together, somebody builds, it's like somebody built the internet, somebody built the GPS, somebody built the payment engine, somebody else went and built something, and this and that. And ultimately, now you have services at your doorstep, right? The services at doorstep didn't happen because somebody sat with starting from the very foundation. So why not for health? Why don't we see who brings in what, and what are the motivations, right? Rather than one person trying to bring everything is impossible. Can, I would not say impossible. It will never be at scale. It has to be a sliver.
Sanjay, just to understand that if you're talking about so many actors and stakeholders in play, and at another level, we're talking about you know, when you want to do scale, you're talking about no context. I'm just trying to figure out that how do these stakeholders come in? Because not everyone is necessarily looking at, uh, how should I say, just large scale. They may be looking at coming together to do a certain scale, but not necessarily at population scale. How do you then balance out the need of doing things at population scale, but also working with stakeholder objectives and things like that? How does one balance that act?
I think we always think about uh, a situation as something that can be dealt by an organization. But at scale, a situation has to be dealt by a network. So we have to understand network sciences and formation of networks, and why do networks get created, and what are the different types of networks, because society is a network and you have to address that challenge with a support network rather than a support organization. And if it's a network, then there are different kinds of nouns who are people in the network and different kinds of actions that they take in the network. And what's the right balance? What is the way, who's the most effective actor for a certain action that needs to be taken? You need someone who can be with the community at the moment of realization of that action. But you also need someone who makes it easier for that person, who reduces their cost, who reduces their complexity, who ensures knowledge diffusion, who builds their capacity, and so on and so forth. Today, what happens is that everybody works like an organization, right? So somebody does teacher training, somebody does curriculum development, somebody is sending school bags, somebody is fixing the toilet, somebody is putting the roof. And the assumption is that the people in the community will put it all together, because I'm doing my thing. And so like I'm a school principal. I'm going to put it all together, right? Somebody's going to bring this and that and the other. But that's the way we think that person is going to put it all together, right? Rather than saying no, there's a certain sense in this network in terms of how this needs to be done. So people who are good at sensing and forming a network and understanding it, who is this for? Right? I'll continue with the education example because probably it's commonly more closely understood. We have all been through the school system, so it's easier to understand. So there's a school, there's a teacher, and if we are trying to improve children's educational outcomes, this is the interaction between the child and the teacher where the real work is happening. Most of it, because we also know that a lot of teaching happens outside the school environment, at homes, etc. But for a minute, I'm leaving that out. Child and teacher, that interaction has to be of very high fidelity, very high quality, and everybody is trying to put in their energy to ensure how to improve that interaction. And for that interaction to happen, many things will go in. So there are people who are the first round of network actors around that teacher. I call it the proximate networks. The proximate networks, people that the teacher meets every day, systems that the teacher encounters every day. And to your question, that network has a very proximate relationship. But that proximate network is only going to be effective if its support network works. That could be government actors, that could be the block education officer, that could be the district education officer, cluster resource person, who knows, right? The multiple actors whose job is to ensure the proximate network is effective. And then there are larger system actors who are more policy, regulation, narrative, technology. So it's like an onion, right? It's layers, 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 right? But we don't see that system. If we don't see that system as the layers and capacitate respective layers with either technology or narrative or capability differently, then you are right in saying that you're working on a large scale initiative, you're only looking at the first layer, but you don't really understand what happens when the teacher encounters the child on the ground, that the NGO knows who's there in the village, sitting next to under the tree with the teacher, with the no roof and holding an umbrella while it's raining, and some teacher is trying to write on a chalkboard. They know what's happening, but you don't see that as a part of this network. And that's when things start to get complicated. Then we say, forget all these layers, go in and just fix that thing, which is great, should be done, but that's very hard to scale. Because how many places would you go in, right? So it's an impossibly difficult question, but that's why we said that we need to challenge our thinking, and the only way to challenge our thinking was to create a model of thinking. Coming back to your first question of why was societal thinking born, was we need some questions which drive us up the wall, right? And that's what this is essentially.
So obviously it is very tough. It is difficult. It requires lots of players and all of that. But kind of swinging to the other side, that uh, in the process of doing your work, I mean, have you found some things that have uh, surprised you and worked really well? I mean, it's like you didn't expect something to work, because obviously this is a new way of thinking. You're looking at the ecosystem as a whole. You're kind of appreciating and acknowledging the value of different players, and you thought it will not work in a certain way. So I'm kind of looking at a positive outcome or something that surprised you and worked really well in any kind of example.
Oh, there are so many examples. I love to be surprised every day. But there's one that's very dear to my heart. So in 2017, I went to a school. I was under this quest that why is it that some schools do better than the others under the same circumstances? Same budget, same infrastructure, similar parents, similar children, same financial conditions, first generation learners. And then one school does well, the other does not. So I said, obviously, something is different about the leader who runs that school. So that was the quest, saying, how do we develop this leadership, right? Because we talk about leadership development as something that happens at a cordon wheel kind of a setting, but this is some rural district school, and there's a leader who's running and who's doing a great job, right? Who's doing better education than some of the most resource schools, right? How? So one day I walk into the room of this school principal, and behind his chair is this poster which says, "Do one thing every day that scares you." And so I asked him, saying, "Why have you put it here?" And in the bottom, in the fine print, it said, "Taking risks takes practice."
Nice.
I said, "Why have you put this here?" He said, "See, if I have to do, or if I just do what I've been told to do, taught to do, capacitated to do, resourced to do, budgeted to do, my children have no future. I have to understand where they are, what they need, what are the circumstances, and I have to do what is required for them. And I may go off script. And if I go off script, it's scary because somebody will ask me, some auditor will come and say, who told you to do this? Where do you find the money? And something or the other." So he said, but if you go off script a little bit every day, it doesn't bother anyone. So he's like, I do a little bit different things every day. It compounds over time. I said, wow, what a fantastic idea. India has about 1.5 million schools. If 1.5 million times 2 or 3, some 3 to 4 million leaders did one little thing different every day, we would have a different education system. So I said, we should try this idea. So it's been a long journey now. Now this is 2025. So 8 years in, I built a whole initiative along with some of the others, funded by Shibulal Family Philanthropies, called Siksha Lokam, which essentially was the idea that how can micro improvements and everyday small change be a habit of the school leaders? I didn't know how far it'll go, but I have been surprised by its offtake, because what it changed was not the solution we were trying to deploy, because there was none. We were changing people's ability to change. And that is what was the surprising part. We were not saying, okay, here is a manual, go do this, or here is a procedure, do that. We were changing their confidence, their self efficacy, their belief that they can change things around there, right? And do it in small steps so that you don't really get scared of doing it. So do one little scary thing every day, right? And it's all right. So I think that, and then I started seeing its generalization. This was cool. I said, let's go to hospitals. Let's go to, let's take it anywhere. I think what we have lost, let's take it to urban settings. I'm sitting here in Bangalore, you are there in Mumbai. We need to improve our ability to change. And the only way to do it is to do it in small steps. And I think that's surprising for me. Saying, do we understand that we have increasingly lost our ability to change? And how change avoiding we have each of us become? And look at that school which is performing poorly, and if that was change avoiding, children have no future. And we are grooming more and more children to be change avoiders rather than change makers. Why are we doing that? So that's I live with that surprise every day, because whenever I go, I was in Meghalaya day before, and Guwahati and Meghalaya, and I was meeting change makers. And I'm like, wow, this person has really built that change making fiber. They really have built that ability to change. Now that is infrastructure. For me, that is societal scale infrastructure, the ability to change. On that, I can port education, I can port healthcare, I can port poverty alleviation, I can port justice, because that's a wiring for me. Right? Ability to change is the wiring.
So then, if that be the wiring, and like you said, it's as basic as roads or HTTP or whatever else have you. I mean, how do you then? I mean, it's kind of almost sounds counterintuitive, right? You're talking about incremental change at a micro level, but to be done at scale, which means everybody needs to do this, and therefore everybody does. It almost sounds like utopian, like, doesn't it? So I mean, how do those two things? I mean, how would you even begin to do something like that? Just your thoughts on that, because none of these are really question answers, really.
No, very good point that it can't be done. I've always believed that people change at their own speed or their
Correct.
own pace, uh, and and hence we have to then look at this idea and see what does it mean to different subsystems, and why would people, going back to that story of mine, why did that person in the first place put up that poster? There must have been a day when that person decided to put some double sided tape behind it and stick it on the wall. What happened? Why did that person do it? What was he trying to get to? Right. And so the question then comes down to, if that is so fundamental and so infrastructural, then different people will want to put up that poster for different reasons. That poster for me is symbolic, right? So want to put it down for different reasons. Somebody may want to put it down because they are trying to improve farmers' income. Somebody want to put it up because they are trying to improve healthcare outcome of tribal communities, or they're trying to get education deep into the tribal or villages, etc., etc., or commerce getting better, and so on and so forth. But many a times we assume that uh, we have the answer, and we need to build capacity of people to execute the answer that I have. So I have a solution, but you don't know how to use it. So I am going to build your capacity to use this. So what have I changed? I have changed your ability to implement or absorb my solution. I have not changed your ability to change. Right. And that's why we said never distribute solutions, distribute the ability to solve. Now that's a different design. It's not the same design. And that is where, again, full circle back to the construct, saying if you want to distribute the ability to solve, then you have to understand what makes it easier to solve for people. That school principal who put up that poster on the wall, what makes it easier for him to actually make a change? If somebody else wanted to be like that, because if you don't make it easier and easier and easier to make that small change happen, like micro change is sometimes misleading. You use this phrase incremental. I think we should use a combined phrase, incrementally compounding.
Right.
If we don't use the words, the second one, it looks
It's
like
small
it's a
thing.
small change. But what we miss is that it's multiplying, and small things, when they multiply, they become very large, right? So, and we know that, right? So that question around how do we do make small changes that have the ability to compound, and I also love this. There's a very beautiful YouTube video on dominoes, which are organized in increasing order of size. Not those ones that run around like small rails. This is the increasing order of size, and that every domino can knock down a next domino, which is one and a
Size.
half times the
Correct.
size. Right. And so, if you look at what, even if you go back and analyze, say, Aadhaar or UPI, or what has been happening in different like ONDC and Namayatri and what have you, it's always like that. That something then makes something little more difficult possible. Now that you have identity, you can crush the cost of eKYC from $25 to 50 cents. Now that you have eKYC, you can change this. Now that you can change this, you can change that. I think that part everyone misses. What everyone says, looks at is saying, why will a micro or why will an incremental change the society? But incremental compounding is the one that actually changes the society, right? And we miss that. So what our quest in design always is, what should I do? Not that I want to do a small thing. What should I do which makes the next problem feasible to solve easier? And will that one solve the next one easier? Will that one solve the next one easier? Because I have identity, I can do KYC. KYC means I can get a phone connection easily. If I get a phone connection easily, there'll be a lot of phone connections. If there are a lot of phone connections, the cost of the data plans will drop. If the cost of data plans will drop, phone penetration will increase. If the penetration increases, phone cost will come down. If the phone cost will come down, more digital technology. I just tick, 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 right? So we never think like that, right? Why not? Right? A good chess master is the one who knows the fifth move. So if we are trying to solve a very intractable, complex problem, we should know the fifth, 10th, 15th, 20th move and then start. And that incremental change many a times would seem to people saying, who thought of that? It's stupid, right? What's the big deal? Show me evidence, show me some studies and show me evidence that this thing works. And it's okay. We live with that every day, right? It's all right? I remember an interesting story from this book called Pinpoint, I think it was called, about GPS. And they were presenting this business case for GPS. And so somebody said, so tell me, what does GPS do? And said, oh, GPS, it tells you where you are. Said, how stupid is that? I know where I am. But that innovation, it changed the world, right? So it's always that living with that uncomfortable space, that there will be a domino effect, there will be a multiplication, there will be a compounding because of the simplicity, the fundamental nature, the minimalism. I'm sure Pramod would have talked about this, the minimalism of what you're creating, that creates this possibility. The more monolithic, the more end-to-end, holistic, comprehensive, there's so many words for that, the more end-to-end it is, the less likely it is to scale.
Wow. That is just so, yeah. And I think that is also a legacy of technology, and kind of a lot of people from a technology background coming into this, to everybody looks at an end-to-end and all of that. But I think the thinking is divorced from the technology, and that's more, there's no better way of looking at it than what you have said, is that, we are not trying to force fit a technology to solve a problem, but we are trying to shift that thinking and making, and I think for the first time I realized when you said it, is that making this incremental compounding also acceptable. Because if it is incremental, you should not discard it, because incremental is also good. Because the other side of this problem is, if it is not 1 billion, I won't do it. But you must, like you said, the 5 moves ahead, that this one incremental 5 moves down the line will be a billion, is I think what you need to be able to visualize. That's
very well said. And Ernest Hemingway wrote this book called The Sun Also Rises. In that, there's this character who goes bankrupt, and so his friend asks him, how did you go bankrupt? He said, in 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly.
This kind of thinking requires a mindset shift. It requires a cultural shift and requires many other shifts. How do you get people to move from a certain way, which is the way we are taught to think, to going into thinking like systems leadership? How does that shift happen? Because, I'm sure there's lots and lots of questions that are asked along the way. And I'm sure in your experience, you would have had people say, this is not going to work because you're not thinking it through. You may have seen 5 steps ahead, but they've not been able to see the 5 steps with you. How do you bring about this mindset shift in people to say, you're not going to solve from end to end, but you're going to solve in a different way for an end-to-end solution?
So I think This is the question that I've been living with at my center, the Center for Exponential Change, which I am running, is that are these people's exception, people who think like this? Or is this something which can be made available or made possible for people to embrace, right? Even the current model of thinking that we work
Correct.
with were crazy at some point in
Right.
time, right? Till it eventually sort of assimilated, made sense. There were more exemplars, there were more illustrations, and so on. So over the last 9 years or so, I have been engaging with more than about 500 leaders across 20 countries, right? Saying, what does it mean if you apply this way? If you do this kind of questioning into different topics, right? And you know, Amazon forests. What does it mean? What does it mean when you go into care economy of Indonesia? What does it mean, right? So because when you push it, then its boundaries get tested. Saying, is this something very specific to your life experience, or is this more generic that anybody can apply in their life experience? But my deepest realization was just because there's a pattern and there's an inspiring set of stories around it, it doesn't get
Correct.
adopted. Nothing happens, right? Because we all listen to it, we say, wow, this is amazing. And it's always like, oh, wow, oh, God, right? So that's the kind of a sense, right? Saying, oh, wow, this is a great story. Oh, God, I don't know what to do. Okay. So we said, okay, well, what are the underlying? So if we have to build a network of leaders who think like this, then we have to create a network of support for them, right? So what are the different things that we need to support them with? Learning is important, right? Even having a conversation like this in a warm setting and having a discussion sometimes opens up questions, and we get pushed back and all sorts of things. So we have to learn together. So is there a network of people who are crazy about solving big problems, but they work together, they learn from each other, what's failing, what's succeeding, and so on and so forth, right? So that's one. Because it's not learning by saying here is a manual or here is a website or here's a document. It doesn't work. It works because leaders banter each other
Correct.
in your terms, right? They have banter all the time. The second important thing is that there has to be a process of design. In the end, any tacit knowledge needs to become explicit. It needs certain boundaries so that I can
Correct.
practice it. Otherwise, it's woolly and sounds good, but I don't know what to do with it. So we constructed. We're looking for more and more processes, so that not because the process is a straight jacket, but if it is not there, people don't know what to do with this. So we said, fine. So for that also you need a network. So we call it the strategic design network. These are designers. These are people who they say, okay, let's see, what problem are you trying to solve? Let's see if we can think of it. But the most important part, the third leg of this whole journey is we need
Correct.
money. Because if you look at the funding flows, if you look at the way the grant systems work, if you look at the state capital, if you look at multilateral capital, private capital, philanthropic capital, it all works in that paradigm where we started today in the discussion. What's your program? Where's the evidence? What's the community? And scale for them is going from 50 hospitals to 60 hospitals. And if they put up a question saying, how do we deal with this in 50,000 hospitals? They would say, that's a great question, but that's theoretical. Keep it aside. Let's get practical.
Correct.
Right. So we get practical by adding 10 more hospitals. That's our extent of practicality that we bring into this conversation. Right. So it needs money to think. It needs money to do, but it needs money to think. Thinking requires resources. It requires people's time, brain power, capacity to bring different actors, convening. So we said there has to be a funding network which funds thinking. Because if everybody is just funding doing, no wonder thinking is not happening, because everybody's funding only doing, nobody's funding thinking. So we constructed that. Then we said it also needs a lot of different capabilities. No single organization knows everything. So how do we make people collaborate as a network of actors? So it needs a collaborative network. Somebody knows how to deal with the human habits, and I may need it because I'm working on tuberculosis prevention in the country of
Correct.
Liberia, but I would not know where to find one when I need one. So why don't we build a network of people who bring very diverse set of skills, but we don't know when will they be needed, right? But they know, okay, this is happening, these are the kind of conversations, etc. And lastly, we need to build leadership more and more and more, create more leaders. So these are the kind of networks that we are looking at strengthening more and more and more. Like they say, no, that you have to set a thief to catch a thief. So you have to build a network to build a network. And so that's the quest. Early still, I always say it's only 9 years out of the 25-year project. So I'm a third grader. I'm at the moment in the third grade. In 9 years, you get to third grade, right? And there's a long time to graduate.
So, in this quest for building a network, of course, there is the network that you and your immediate surroundings have created. But it almost seems to me like just like people have started teaching now humanities and design thinking, this whole maybe societal thinking or just some tools or the process of thinking like this needs to almost be taught at the school level. That unless you start thinking like this early, I mean, probably like you said, you've done it for 9 years and you've like your third grade, but it has taken you that much time to come to the realizations that you have done, and it is just like physics or mathematics or English literature, that so that the next generation gets a running start. I mean, is there something we should even consider doing at the education level? One is, of course, to educate them, but should we be educating them differently or teaching them different ways to apply their current subjects? I mean, whether it's whatever it is that they're learning, whether it's physics, maths, geography, history, whatever else they're being taught, or maybe it's vocational skills. I mean, so is that even a valid thought or a process, or is this something that you start thinking when all your basic needs are satisfied and you say, okay, now I will start thinking about solving the problems of the world?
Yeah. Because so you're so right about this, and I have been prototyping this in to learn what does this mean. We ran a prototype with 143 school children, grade 8, 9, 10, to understand how they associate with something like this. Is it like too fancy, too esoteric? At the heart of this thinking also is a value system, that we believe in the agency, dignity, and choice of people, that we believe in creating open, shareable public resources, that we believe in coming together to solve things. There's a value system, there's a belief system. So using that belief system and less of this whole process business, we went to the school saying the children should get the belief system. Do they believe in these ideas, and do they see it in their real lives with their friends, with their families, and do they associate with it, saying, yes, I would like my friend's dignity to be nurtured, right? What does that mean? It went fantastically well. So that is one part that we have learned. I've taken it to colleges, interacting with college students, because they're a little more. It has given me a lot of learning and a lot of confidence that yes, this works. There's a colleague of mine who runs an initiative in our center called the Think Collective. So it's about who are the people who want to come together and think. It's not about let's design the next big solution to the next big problem. It's just a spacing. Come on, let's just think. And it's growing slowly, slowly. Young entrepreneurs in the development sector, people who have just started a new NGO or who have been running an NGO for 10 years, or some even are running for like 15, 20, that's okay. But people who are on this, or people who are running accelerators, incubators, different kinds of things. And that community is growing, and every day, every week, there are people who are like, okay, what is this? I have been working with many of the incubators for a long time, like huge respect for the Nudge Foundation's incubator, or what was happening at the NSR cell, or even under Shiksha Lokam, uh, with one of the sister organizations, we set up an incubator called Edumentum. So because the young leaders, and that's why I wrote the three books. I wrote the three books called Think Scale, Think Speed, Think Sustain, to help people think without necessarily having a process requirement. Uh, so it is growing. Design thinking took about 60 years to come by. So it's gonna be a while. And it's okay. And we learn and we edit and we iterate. I don't think we have like Sheetal started by saying that I'm a beginner, and I retain that, by the way. And we have to keep that beginner's mindset on, because I think it's going to need more clarity, more comfort, more profoundness for it to be universally embraced. It still requires, it's got lots of rough edges, uh, it's got a lot of assumptions, and we have to live with that discomfort. It's okay.
I have a slightly different thought. Whenever I think about everything that y'all are speak of when you talk about doing things at population scale, it almost makes me feel like only NGOs can do this, or only people who have nonprofit thought processes do this. But wouldn't people who work for profit, if they change the way they think and they change the way they could scale things, wouldn't that have an equally large impact? And I'm just trying to understand, where does the barrier come in, or where does it stop people for profit from thinking at population scale? Because ultimately, profit game is also from a scale perspective. So I'm just trying to figure, what are those learnings from your systems that people, and think of it as the startup
Yeah.
community in this country. I know they get a lot of things right, they also get a lot of things wrong. But if there were learnings from your thinking that they could adopt, would it give us answers which are quite radically different? Maybe not solve for all the larger issues, but solve for quite a few issues, even though there is a profit mindset.
I have been spending a lot of time also over these years with for profit startups in India, especially the new age ones who are young leaders, native internet born, and starting a different kind of a mindset. And most of them actually are the ones that are serving the needs of India in the scale domain. It's easier to think about a business that can serve 100, 200, 300 million customers of India, but who is serving the
Correct.
billion is always the question. So I've been spending time there to understand what it means. Firstly, this pattern of thinking they get. But there are three important considerations. Firstly, because it's a business, competition comes as a default character of that
Correct.
system. We can't say that you can run a business by being non-competing, right? It doesn't sit, that the construct is not designed for it, right? But competing for what is an interesting
Correct.
question, right? So what I've been realizing is that organizations, like if you look at amazing startups like Apna Mart, Misho, these organizations are entering that different world because they're competing for
Correct.
inclusion rather than competing for exclusivity, right? So I think when the business leaders who are building that business saying I'm competing for inclusion, they see the market
Correct.
differently. It's still a market, but they see the market differently. But for that market to be viable, we have to reduce its cost of coordination. If you go back in the history of economics, there was this guy called Ronald Coase who talked about why do organizations get formed, and the externalities of cost and the internalization of cost, etc. So cost of coordination is a very important factor. If it's very hard to work the market, it becomes financially unviable. And that is when some of the underlying rails, like say an Aadhaar or a UPI, etc., reduce a lot of those cost of trust, cost of connecting, cost of proving, etc. Now, all of a sudden, these organizations find that that segment becomes an economically viable segment, right? Because the cost of coordination is lesser. But the third, very important, which is probably in my mind the hardest, is what are the kind of products and services that these unserved communities actually need? Rather than saying one thing that worked in my urban setting for an urban consumer, I'm going to take it. So, do they have a co creative character, which means can they work with the communities to design? If we get these three broadly, I said, I'm sure amongst many others, I have seen that it starts to work, that business actually starts to drive transformation at scale. It's financially viable because cost of coordination has been
Correct.
harnessed. It's competing for inclusion, so their lens to the market is different, right? And at the same time, it is co-creative with the communities. The kind of products and services, the kind of things they focus on, starts to actually serve the needs of the people, which means that the market becomes feasible. And then it's a question of who can scale well and who can really organize well and run a good business, which I think is a more solved problem than this one, right? Saying how do you organize and run a good business? Yeah. So I am a big believer that private innovation on public infrastructure is a force for inclusion. But then we have to ensure that we focus that energy on, in the case of India, 1.4 billion people, the energy has to focus on the billion. While there are many viable opportunities in the 400 million also, right? So which side of the market are you looking at? But it's not the same. What you do for 400 million will not
A
work
billion. Yeah.
for this market.
So I have to ask you this, and while I've been asking, I've been constantly being distracted with those two guitars hanging in the background. So I really wanted to ask you. So do you play? Do you also, as part of societal thinking, have your own band or something like that? Or?
I have a band, not as a part of societal thinking. A few of us friends, we do play music. Yes, I do play those guitars. And why I keep them in my frame is so that I'm constantly reminded that that needs my time as well. So but yeah.
That's kind of a project of mine to at least learn 5 or 10 guitar solos before it's too late to play the guitar.
Well, the interesting part is that it's never too late to play the guitar.
Yeah. That was
It's the first day.
completely left of field.
That's how breakthrough thinking happens, I think.
Agreed, left of field, but
I'm applying all the conversation we've been having today. On the first day, just pick the guitar and then put it back. Change your ability to change.
Nicely put.
he'll have to first buy the guitar, then pick it up, and then
Procuring infrastructure is my easiest problem. Is after that is the issue. Like buying the best shoe, buying the best clothes to exercise. All of that is the easy part.
Yeah. No, even when you have your jogging shoes, if first day you just keep it out and keep it back in, next day you'll ask yourself, why keep it back in? I might as well put it on. But if you don't do the first domino, the second domino is not following.
Right? I'm going to use this excuse to position this purchase of a guitar with my wife now. This is my first domino.
Okay. She'll say, well, the first domino is go find a friend who has a guitar and get it for $5.
Nice.
I'm going to tell his wife to ask him what the next 5 moves are after the guitar. So anyway, coming back to where we were, everything at scale is great. Have you ever thought that there are some ideas which are best kept small?
I think scale is made up of millions of small ideas. I always say that no one solution can actually accomplish state. In India, we are a billion people. We actually need a billion solutions. It kind of sounds crazy, but you need a billion solutions. So I think every solution, the more sharper, the more effective, the more direct it is great. What really needs to be at scale is what's context free. What really needs to be, one thing at scale must be context free. Few things at scale should be context aware. Many things small is where the real change happens, right? So look at it like a big bang. Like just like this, right? So you have something which is very common to everyone, roads, right? And that should scale, right? Beautiful. But it doesn't mean that every car has to be an ambassador. If you recollect the ambassador from the history of India, it doesn't mean that every car has to be an ambassador. So And Schumacher wrote this beautiful book, which was Small is Beautiful, right? So I think small is very important. But just the small and isolated small and out of network disconnected small, while however beautiful it is in its context, is injustice to its smallness. It should be a part of a larger network. It should be connected. It should be easier. It should be something that people can learn from, something that people can replicate in other places. People use the word replication. I said, if you just add a hyphen, call it reapplication, that would be much better instead of calling it replication. It's reapplication. I'm learning from what Samiran is doing and I'm solving Sheetal's problem, right? I'm reapplying. So I think I don't think it's a good debate of small versus large. Uh, the good debate is many times people ask me, "Oh, so now I have a big question. So you know the answer?" I said, "Yes, I know the answer. Are you willing to accept it?" Yes. Okay, so what's the answer? The right answer is I don't know. Because when I accept that answer, I'm willing to connect other people's answers. If I say I know, then I know the answer, right? And so you should listen to me and do what I'm telling you. Saying I don't know, I know the question, but I think I don't know the answer, but collectively probably we do. And the collective is a collection of many, many small answers. But somebody has to make it easier. That should scale, right? Like the internet made every small businesses easier. That should scale. But every small business is beautiful. The little bakery outside my house is amazing.
Correct.
Now, that doesn't mean we need to become a templatized standard bakery because that's what will scale. No, I think diversity is beautiful. Like many a times I have this debate with people saying, "Oh, we are such a diverse country." I said, when I was in school, in class 7, I had a history book called Kundra and Kundra. And the first chapter was unity in diversity. Right? And I said, I grew up learning that diversity is great. And we don't need to build uniform systems. We need to build unified systems. And so the question is, how do we ensure there is more diversity? But the ability to unify is what must scale. Can we connect it? Can we interoperate it? Right? If you look at some of the larger conversations you've been having with other friends from this ecosystem, it's all about creating this unifying infrastructure and not the quest for a uniform solution. And so diversity means, Sheetal, to your question, every small innovation is amazing, right? So that's the way we have to probably look at the world.
That's very interesting.
So
You got
you
me
have it.
thinking on that for a minute.
Now you have your answer.
I know you have a flight to catch, and therefore we will let you go in a minute. But I wanted to ask you. So we know that you play the guitar and you do all of that to have downtime. But if you had a magic wand to change one mindset about tech for societal good, what would you want? What would you wave it at?
If I was to wave it at, I would wave it at many things, but okay, let's stick to the tech for now.
You can go out of tech,
If I was to
Sanjay.
wave-
That's absolutely fine.
No, I think all of us who are trying to solve a problem that are very genuinely uh, difficult, complex, uh, demanding, and making people's lives harder. Um, we don't design for our redundancy. We design for our success. We had that conversation at the beginning. And I think all of us, whether I'm in the government, I'm in the civil society, I'm in the private sector, we have to have that mindset that if I'm able to build the agency, dignity, and choice of the people in the community, I always have to chase this never achievable state of redundancy. It's not that I will ever become redundant, but I have to chase that redundancy, because if I don't chase that redundancy, I will concentrate power, I will concentrate resources, I will concentrate decisions, I will concentrate ABCDFG, and we will not get what we want. So if I had that magic wand, even if it's technology, today we have this conversation on technology. Uh, it's an aggregating, concentrating force. If you look at the financial markets, it's an aggregating, concentrating force. If you look at governance, it's an aggregating, concentrating force. Because none of them are approaching it with the mindset saying, there would be a day when we would be redundant. Vis-a-vis, there would be a day where we'll be indispensable.
Correct.
And hence, our design is so difficult, so complicated, so much of challenge in our hands. So if I had, like, you really gave me the magic wands, like now
Yeah.
I can go anywhere. I would aim for that, saying, can everybody start thinking how to design for redundancy? Because that mindset will help people strengthen others rather than, because when you have a redundancy
Correct.
mindset, you want to strengthen
Right.
others. If you have a success mindset, you want to just make yourself stronger.
So,
And I think we lose the game if we are only trying to make ourselves stronger rather than making others stronger. That's where we
so
lose.
this is such an interesting idea. I'll just tell you, I had this boss long ago who said that, the first thing I do when I take a job is to identify my successor. So that basically make my job redundant. He said, because unless that happens, then I will not move anywhere. So, and I,
Correct.
I mean, I found that very interesting in an organization and a selfish concept, but it's so true now that you kind of laid it out in a societal form that, unless you can make yourself redundant in your job, you are not going anywhere because you're so good at being an electrician, you're never going to become an electrical engineer or design electrical systems. So it's quite brilliant.
Yeah.
With that, Sanjay, we're going to let you go. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast. It was an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. And as I think about this conversation, I'm like, there are so many things I have to think about. So thank you so much for getting us thinking about all of these things. And thank you so much. And we hope that we will have you back on our podcast once again sometime in the future.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And it's such a pleasure to have a conversation of this nature because, as you know, this is not necessarily a very common conversations. And we hope we have many of these over.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you
once
so
again.
much, Sanjay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.